Hello, friends. Host Eric here, and it is my great pleasure today to introduce, if for those of you who don't know, many of you probably already do, Jack from the World Socionics Society.
Hi,
And,
everybody.
and Jack participated in the live stream I made the other night and said some interesting things about ISFJs, or what he would call, not ISFJs, but in socionics terms, they're referred to as SEI, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's just dive right in. First and foremost, if I were somebody brand new to socionics and I thought maybe I was an ISFJ, and I wanted you to explain to me what does socionics tell me about ISFJs, what would be your general overview explanation?
So I would say that when looking at the SEI, the main focus is that, well, say an ISFJ coming from MBTI ISFJ. The main difference, I think, is how introverted sensation has been defined. I think that the way that Jung initially defined it, came from his background, looking at people with mental illnesses, his clinical background, and his description was of someone with an internalized state of how things are and the inability to reconcile that with the factual reality around us.
A little NI bias, you mean? A little bit of an NI bias?
Maybe, although he didn't identify himself with NI, he identified himself with TI. So I'm not sure. I think in general,
Listen, Jack, would you agree
yeah,
when a typing person mistypes themselves
yeah.
that we should just generally sort of shake our heads at what they have to say about typing? Not necessarily, but come on. He is not an INTP.
I've known people who have not managed to type themselves accurately, but nevertheless have shown really good insights about people and about fitting what they've observed into the systems. I think that self-awareness does not, or a lack of self-awareness, does not exclude an awareness of others and a knowledge of the theory.
I
I
would
think
agree.
people are,
I'd agree with you in general,
yeah,
except I would point out that this particular theory and the kind of awareness that you're going to have about other people would seem to me predicated on an understanding of what it means to attend via a given means of attention. And if you can't type yourself correctly, then you either misunderstand what that given means of attention means, or you don't understand it at all.
yeah. I mean, it's a difficulty that, well, it's often the task people make that if someone is the creator of an idea, the creator of Jungian typology, Jungian flow, one assumes he must be the authority above all on it.
Right.
The point is, he's just a guy who's just discovered these ideas, just trying to piece it together and make sense of it, and he's put it in a book. That doesn't mean he's going to have nearly the same level of knowledge and experience which we have many decades on.
Right.
So,
It's like I discovered pancakes, I invented them, but I'm not the best pancake chef. I don't really necessarily know how to make a great pancake. I just was the genius visionary who came up with pancakes.
you haven't necessarily mastered the squidgy, soft beauty of a nice pancake in a frying pan.
But Jack, that doesn't mean you shouldn't still thank me for coming up with pancakes. Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So you're
You're
welcome.
one position in a long sequence of which leads to the pancakes we experience today.
Not only did I come up with them, but I rejected my initial instinct, which was to name them Eric cakes. I said, no, make these for the people.
Pan, all cakes.
Yeah. Okay.
These are all cakes.
Okay, back on topic. So,
Okay, that is it. So
you think
SEI,
Jung's wrong. You think Jung's wrong, basically, about SI, and you think that a better definition of SI is what?
Okay, well, the MBTI definition of SI is gone through certain interpretations on Jung. I know that Keirsey offered his opinion, which became the SJ idea, that it's all about tradition. Other people say it's all about one's input sensory data. I think there's an emphasis on what one's experienced in the past and not wanting to try out new things because of an over-reliance on past data. I think that's a common theme we find in MBTI. Whereas when it comes to socionics, that's not really what it's about. It's about harmonizing one's physical sensory experience. If you take extroverted information elements, a bit like cognitive functions, and introverted information elements. They differ in that one is trying to increase the intensity and amount of something, increase the quantity, the extroverted ones. The introverted ones are trying to refine the quality. They're trying to take what's there and make it as integrated, as fitting together, and as perfect as possible, you could say. So if you take extrovert sensation, introvert sensation, they're both approaching sensation. They're both approaching that physical reality which we have around us. But whereas the extrovert sensation types are going to be trying to, well, conquer more territory, dominate their environment, be the top of whatever hierarchy they're on, for instance. When it comes to the introvert sensation types, they're trying to be content with what they have. They're trying to make the most of their existence in terms of experiencing it, enjoying it, creating the greatest flow of processes, greatest amount of convenience, knocking away those blockages in the flow of a day-to-day that stop.
So if I were to ask you, listen, I've decided I want to optimize an environment to make an ISFJ happy. What could I do as a person not that ISFJ to optimize that person's environment or experience to better serve the ISFJ stack?
Well, it's got to be a nice environment. What I mean by a nice environment, it's got to be clean, it's got to have a nice aesthetic, it's got to be enjoyable. Where usually the ISFJ is very, I'd say ISFJ, I mean SCI, so of course there may not be a direct parallel, there might be a direct overlap there.
When in Rome, Jack, when in Rome. When in Rome, Jack. Here in this room, I always call them ISFJs. And I know that I'm talking about SIFE. So if you call them ISFJs here, everybody who's familiar with this particular Rome will know exactly what you mean.
So I'm in Rome at the moment. I'm going to go by the Roman tradition to preserve the Pax Romanum. So ISFJs, they can immediately react to an environment which isn't sufficiently cold or hot, isn't at the right level of warmth and temperature. The beauty of their surroundings. If something's ugly, if something's off, they'll immediately react to it and they'll try to put it right. They need to make sure that everything is sensorically in balance around them. You could say.
What happens? What happens when an ISFJ experiences their own FI?
Sorry, what was that?
I said, what is likely to be the response by an ISFJ when she experiences her own FI? How is she going to likely process her own feelings?
Oh, they're very good at that. So with an ISFJ, one thing I've noticed is that, at least from the ISFJs I know, for instance my fiancée, when they meet new people, they may hang back a bit because they want to find out and get an idea of what they think of a person first. That's the introverted feeling coming out. Now, it's for introvert sensation reasons. ISFJs will be, you could say, even terrified, as it were, of awkward conversations. I wouldn't say terrified, that's an exaggeration. They hate having awkward conversations. They hate the flow of social experience being disrupted in an unpleasant sort of manner. So what they'll do is they'll hang back, suss people out, and then they'll move in to have that conversation with them, which will be a far more enjoyable experience. So using FI quite a bit. And the ISFJ knows when they don't like someone, they want to get a funny vibe from someone. They're less forward about it, less obvious about it, compared to what you would say would be the ISFP, FISE. But the FISE will quickly mark out who they don't like and create a psychological distance using that extrovert sensation to push people away.
So what's functionally? How does sixth slot define FI for the what I call sixth slot? You know, which is How does that define FI in the ISFJ's experience? The slot.
Okay, so the slot would be what we call the demonstrator function. It is something which is very strong. It's as strong as the leading function, the first slot, but it's not valued. It's not used for its own sake. but something which is constantly on in the background, operating, working, the person can rely on it. They can take it for granted. That they don't see it as anything particularly important to them. They won't aspire to become greater in it. It's something which they do, and they completely confident in their ability to do it. So if you apply that with FI to an ISFJ, they know what they think of people. They are good at monitoring their one-to-one relationships and are good with one-to-one relationships. They know who their friends are. They like going to see their friends quite regularly. They don't miss contact. They can immediately feel when someone else is creating more distance from them. They know when they need to go up and check on someone if they haven't seen them in a while. They're very good at touching in. Both ISFP and ISFJ are good at that. ISFJ does it in the background. They don't place an emphasis on their personal judgments of people and keeping them at psychological distance or seeing any greater potential of their intentions, that sort of thing.
A couple of questions. One, do you think that different types relate to their sixth function slot differently from other types? In other words, does an ISFJ relate to her sixth function slot differently than I relate to TE? This is my first question.
I'd say that, at least in the theory, you'd relate to your sixth slot in the same way across all types. But how it manifests depends on what's in that slot. So how a TE in a sixth slot or eighth slot will manifest differently to FI in the eighth slot. For us, for instance, ENTP, it's going to be about extroverted thinking, extroverted logic. And it's about extroverted logic. It's going to be that confidence in knowing that we're doing things well. We know our level of ability to do things. We can take for granted the amount of information coming our way. We can, if someone chucks us new facts, we can take it on. We can think about it, debate on it. We won't necessarily be so thrown or so unwilling to enter into the conversation discussion when integrating that new factual data. We know we're confident about knowing how to do things, working out a solution.
Okay. The thing is, you're right about all that. It's interesting that you say that because in a lot of ways, I do express a lot of, in my being, in my manifestation of being, a lot of confidence in my TE in terms of a general, as it manifests as a general value, namely that indeed being solvency oriented, in other words, caring about solving problems rather than just wringing your hands about them or something, is a TE kind of frame of reference. And I do walk around fundamentally with an understanding of myself as somebody who knows how to accomplish things that he wants to accomplish when he wants to accomplish them. However, I would also say that there are other aspects of TE where I'm demonstrably and consistently weak and or borderline incompetent at. Now, such things as when my extrovert thinking is actually applied to physical objects in the world, I find myself to be bad. Objectively, in my objective self-critique, against people who are good at it, for sure, I am bad at it. Like fixing a broken lawnmower or shit like that, right? Yeah. It frustrates me easily, and I always anticipate it's going to go quick, and it never does, and it's like, it's always a clusterfuck of, I've got the whole fucking lawnmower taken apart on the floor now, and, so it's, in the description of TE, I found it useful to make a distinction between, TE that it's occurring in the metaphysical dimension and TE that's occurring in the physical. Namely, stuff that's happening to objects that is the most natural kind of TE is not something I am competent of, nor something that I think myself competent of.
I would agree. For instance, I was trying to fix the toilet recently, and then that was a huge water jet shooting upwards and all over the floor, and slowly the room was flooding, and I had to
which leads to a whole new bathroom.
we managed to just about survive. Hi Kimberly, how you doing?
Sorry.
Hi. Let me ask you though, did you start yours at 11 p.m.?
Did you start the repair?
Did you start the repair of the toilet at 11 p.m.?
Oh, it wasn't that late. It was, I think it was in the evening. I think 7. The thing is, I would have started at 11 p.m. if I'd encountered the problem at 11 p.m. So that the time wouldn't have stopped me, and I'm perfectly capable of ending up in a mess at 11 p.m.
Yes. The thing is, I didn't break the toilet, and I didn't actually make it any. Well, I did make it a little worse, but
oh goodness.
Kim just didn't like the fact that I was trying to do that as she was trying to go to sleep, which makes sense.
We only have one toilet in the house.
I've done really stupid things at 11 p.m. Because the thing is, I don't think I have much in the way of common sense. And I think that's the thing. I'll get exploratory and I'll get inventive, and then I'll do something that people would say you just don't do that sort of thing.
Right.
Right. Okay, yeah. Let me ask you, Jack. When people ask you questions about FI, or when asked to talk about FI, do you feel less competent in discussing it than other functions because it's your polar?
Yes. And I'll be specific about that. So, for instance, if you ask me what I think about someone, as how I feel about them, are they a nice person? Are they not a nice person? What are my feelings towards them as an attitude? I would probably find any way of answering other than actually answering the way you want me to answer. It's like passing over a black hole where I immediately go towards something else. I find some other information element to fill in my answer. I can't hear you.
I said, it's kind of like you're saying, I don't understand the question. What is it that you're asking me? Is this person a nice person? Or, what do you mean? Like, yeah. Against what calculus?
I tend to be quite articulate. I'll find a way of answering. So, for instance, I'll try to say, I can see other people seem to be pissed off at him a lot of the time, or her a lot of the time. I guess that means they're sort of socially out of it. Or I'd say, I find that when they're in the room, I find it very difficult to speak because they are constantly interrupting, or they are, I don't know, throwing darts at puppies or something like that.
You want to make it about their behavior, basically.
Yeah, I might go towards the facts and describe what's happening. Or I might, because the thing is, if I'm unsure, I'll fall back on my demonstrator function because I know that's a safe place. I know I'm not going to muck up in that place so much, unless it's about the physical, which is more TE plus SI, you could say. As long as it's just facts on its own, I can go back there quite comfortably without any problems. But answering an FI-oriented question with FI is where it becomes very difficult. And because I think I'm inclined... it's not as if I'm devoid of personal opinions and attitudes. I think I do have them. But my attitude whenever I experience one is to, one, not have any confidence in it, and two, not treat it with any value and even try to suppress it and ignore it to the point where I actually will put up with things that other people say they're not okay with. I just put up with it because I can't find a rationale to say why it's a problem.
Well, I mean, yeah, because the rationale is that the given thing that's a behavior that one, quote unquote, ought not put up with is such because it makes you feel bad.
Yeah.
And it generally will make anybody feel bad if that sort of behavior. But of course, it depends on the specifics of it. But it will generally make anybody feel bad if you act like that or something. That's why that's why certain things ought not to be put up with. But for you and me, both, the process of feeling bad about something is, generally speaking, unless it's some sort of big tragedy, short-lived and comparatively insignificant to other things that are going on in our lives. We'll compartmentalize it, we'll rationalize it, we'll explain what's going on and understand it, and then put it away, kind of, or something like that.
But that's a strong point for us. It's where ENTPs, also ESTPs, are probably strongest, is quickly reforming, re-explaining any phenomena that we approach, because we've got that fluid dynamism of both extroverted thinking and introverted thinking.
Speaking of that, I just wanted to mention earlier, and of course, but by the time I had the opportunity to get to it, I had three other thoughts pushed it out of line and forgotten about it. But it's that one thing I've noted in asking you, like the last question I asked you, I don't even need to ask you open-ended questions. I can ask you closed questions, and you'll treat them as open-ended anyway. You'll convert them appropriately, which is what, of course, an interviewer would like the interviewee to do with a question. I mean, in general, I would say you've probably interviewed a fair number of people, haven't you?
Oh, good. The last 5 years, I've been interviewing people. When I started out, I was a bit crap.
Right. It's a skill that takes practice, especially for SI users like us. What are your thoughts about interviewing? What do you think makes a good interviewer, and what do you think makes a good interviewee?
Well, of course, I'm going to answer the cliche of a good interviewer listens, but I think it does apply. I think, when I say listening, I mean not coming into an interview with preconceived ideas, or at least being aware of what your preconceived ideas are and trying to think outside of them, try to put on a different hat, challenge them. Because at the end of the day, you need to have listened to someone, listen to what they have said, and actually integrate that rather than what you think they said. Now, there's another part to that.
You want people to be responsive.
Yeah, but the interview has to be willing to challenge what they say, because sometimes people say things and you think they mean something else from what they meant. So if they use a piece of lingo, they say, "Oh, I like to get creative." You got to say, "What do you mean by creative?" You've got to challenge what exactly they mean by that. Otherwise, you may get a different idea in your head. You have preconceived ideas and bias what creative means for you, and it'll be what they mean as creative. So I think that is a skill which I've developed more over time. I started out not doing that, just taking what they say at what seemed to me to be face value, and that led me into problems and mistypes.
Yeah, sure.
Big thing with interviewing.
It's definitely the case that people mean things other than what their words say often. Yeah. I would still maintain that their words say something pretty straightforward usually. So it's when we say that they mean something other than what they say, they may literally mean what they say. But they may non-literally mean something very different. And so it's like they think they're using the word as for what it means, especially if you're talking about something that they're polar, right? Like, I could give you statements about my emotions, assuming I had less metacognition in the mix here about my own shit or whatever. I might make some statements about my own feelings, and then an FI person, well, it's often happened in the past, where I say something about that's my FI right there, and then somebody else goes, Eric, that's not FI, that's FE. I'll go, same difference,
But that's nothing. I've gone to MBTI meetups in London, lots of enthusiasts, and they often end up getting together to complain about SJs. But when you listen to what they actually say, they're talking about completely different phenomena that they disagree with and just lumping that together under SJ. And there's none of that critical thinking saying, actually, that's not what I meant when talking about my SJ parents or whatever it was. So there's a lack of that challenging. And so people can delude themselves into thinking that they're in agreement. But just to answer your point about when someone says something which is literally, it doesn't require any further interpretation, a good way of looking out for where something does need interpretation is when they're using abstract words. It goes back to the basics of information elements, putting together these ideas of what you call cognitive functions. Intuition and ethics or feeling, they be more interpreted, be more personal. You have to convert them into something else, something more concrete to communicate to someone else, who then interprets them themselves back into something which is in their mind's eye as having meaning.
Just to clarify, I'm not saying they don't require interpretation. What I'm saying is that the individual may not have a conscious secondary level of meaning. There may not be a subtext within that individual's head that they're aware of, but it's indicative of things that they're not expressing, right? So that's what I mean by it's not that it doesn't need interpretation. It does. Like, their behavior is not necessarily duplicitous in any sense. What they say is not duplicitous in any sense, because it's very much possible that they believe that their understanding of that word is that they have a full understanding of it, and what they're saying is consistent with that. So, I mean, in that regard, I'm not trying to necessarily interpret some hidden illocutionary frame. I'm just saying you've got to I agree with you that we have to look past the literal meaning of the words to why they're saying what they're saying and what that means to them.
Yes, very much. And yeah, always got to go into an interview, I think, with good faith. You got to assume that people are saying things because they sincerely believe it. They're not trying to fool you. Most of the time, that's not what happens. Most of the time, people aren't trying to fool you. They want to work out what their type is, and there's a sincere desire for that. Especially if they're paying you 35 quid. You know, they're not going to do that to.
And would you agree that it's sort of the typologist's job then to the extent that the person is deceiving themselves and or simply ill-informed because of maybe a cognitive function blind spot or something about a given thing, and is expressing things that if taken literally would be indicative of A, but if interpreted correctly are indicative of B, that it's the typologist's job to work through that non-intentionally deceiving stuff, right?
Yeah. And that takes a lot of experience. That's hard, difficult stuff. And if you're first starting out, you'll get led along by that. It takes experience to realize, oh, I've seen this thing before. I know this trap. I know how to navigate that. Because it's tricky, and you end up with a mistype if you're not careful.
Yeah. So one of my central messages, and I'd like to get your feedback on this, is that we ought, in general, this is how I put it. It sounds to me like you're generally advocating similar things, that we ought not pay so much attention to the displays that people make, and rather to the processes that are the real antecedents of those displays.
Well, there's a guy I used to interact with a lot. His name's Rowan. He used to tell me that you don't go by what they say, you go by what they do. And I think there's a great deal of truth to that. You know, if what they are, how they are acting, how they're behaving, seems to completely contradict what they're saying, that's a good sign that you should apply more scrutiny to what they're saying. And then try to find a narrative which explains both what they're saying and what they're doing.
Okay, so let's do a little advertisement for Jack's typing services, just to give him a little taste of it. Okay, now pretend I walked into Jack's typing service video conference room and have paid him, and he's going to begin typing me. Here I am. Hi, my name's Eric. You never heard of me or met me before, but I live in Laverne, and I'm a big fan of your WSS channel, and I've watched a lot of your videos, so I'm excited to talk to you.
Okay, so usually I do is start with like an open-ended question. So what have you been up to today?
Well, let's see. I woke up. I had a really interesting conversation with somebody on the internet, and I had to go to work, and then I had to go home to meet with this dude from England on the internet.
What was the interesting conversation, and why was it interesting?
It was about IFS, which is Internal Family Systems, which is a model of therapy that helps people who've experienced, who have attachment, who have less something other than secure attachment style, to repair that non-optimal functionality.
And do you have a long-term interest in attachment styles? Is it? Do you have interest in psychology in general?
I mean, I do have an interest in psychology in general. My interest in attachment styles is
2 years long.
It's driven by context. So it's specific to me. I wouldn't be so interested in attachment styles if I didn't have a person in my life that requires me to better understand that and respond appropriately.
I see. And would you say that encountering the issue of attachment styles in your personal relationships, what was your go-to for actually solving the situation? How did you find a way to manage it?
Well, I mean, I guess first I tried to work with her communicatively through, being fair in our talking, which basically means that I'd say, let's talk about this. Here's what I did wrong, and I'm sorry for that. And then I would sort of expect that she would say, okay, well, here's what I did wrong, and I'm sorry for that. But And she didn't respond like that naturally, and I wasn't really sure why. And it turned out to be an attachment style issue.
And how did you figure out that it was an attachment style issue?
Well, I did some research on the internet. I thought, I just was like, what the hell? What is this? I wasn't sure. So, because I've known somebody who had attachment style issues before, but that person was quite different in their overall displays than this current person.
And so you say that you encountered this issue. Your response was to actually research on the internet to try and find things out. Are you someone who regularly looks things up on the internet if you encounter something you don't know?
Yeah.
What do you tend to like to research?
Well, the other day I researched worms for my compost pile. Like what kind of worms you should put in your compost pile. And it turns out, in case you're curious, that the big worms, the big old night crawlers, the fattest of the earthworms, those are not good compost worms. What you want are the skinny red wrigglers, as they're called, red wigglers. So I went and got a pound of those.
And why were you looking up compost worms?
Because I have a compost pile that I want to make composty faster. I want it to go through its natural process, maximal speed. In fact, I want to go back Monday and get at least 1 more pound and maybe 2 more pounds of worms from the local worm dealer. I've become a bit of a worm addict because I snort like half the worms and I put the other half in the compost pile.
You snort half the worms?
Okay, well, it's not me, it's the chickens. And they're not really snorting them, they're eating them. But that's not the point.
Right.
It's still like a local drug dealer for the chickens, okay?
Oh, nice. It's like giving a cat catnip.
Kind of, except it's food for them.
Yeah.
They eat it, but it's their very favorite food is live worms dug fresh out of the ground. For them, that's like a delicious slice of ripe summer fruit on a hot summer's afternoon.
Like spaghetti.
And what made you want to keep chickens?
I didn't want to. My woman did, and although I'm really happy that we have them, I like them a lot. But that wasn't my idea.
Okay, fair enough. And that's interesting. Now, as I think back to Zara, also, well, doesn't keep chickens, but her idea was to create a garden and get bottled milk delivered and all those sorts of wholesome day-to-day things. Okay, so it's interesting there because already looking at it, she's someone who regularly goes to find the information they need to learn how to solve problems. We also see someone who, is involved in solving problems around the house, including with the compost. I see a strength of TE there. There's also a degree of, abstract imagery, certainly in terms of the ripe red fruits and that your chicken's eat and them snorting it. It's not entirely matter of fact. There's some exaggeration there of snorting as well, which also plays into maybe extrovert logic isn't in the leading position. So, just from that small exchange, Eric, we could see, a good deal of information. Now, I wouldn't go straight to working out your type from that, but given that I already know what your type is,
right,
and given that you've given me a certain amount of information, I can extrapolate a likely ENTP-ish typing from that.
Right. Well, the thing is, additionally, I think there's some examples that demonstrate possible pitfalls. Like, for example, it's conceivable to think that somebody who goes and buys worms for the compost and researches that sort of stuff, it might be conceivable to think I might be in the ISFJ category, because that's not necessarily good TE. It's not necessarily TE at all. Kimberly does shit like that. She'll buy a bunch of mealworms and start and then fail at making a mealworm sustaining environment,
Where they all eat each other and then it's gone.
But the thing is that just happens to be, Jack asked, well, what do you do, today? That happens to, or yesterday or whatever. What did you research recently? That happens to be the last thing I researched. So that's the sort of thing that if a typologist is not thorough, then they're gonna go, well, he likes to compost and worms. He's an ISFJ.
Well, yeah, but that's an example of someone who's lacking experience and going by stereotype, and that happens quite a bit. For me, it's a question of, you're telling me about the compost. I'm looking at what you did in that situation rather than the fact that you attend to the compost. I'm looking at the fact that you are, you counter an issue. In both cases, you've gone to research on the internet. You've taken the initiative yourself to find out new factual data to then improve the situation, which is something I haven't seen in a lot of ISFJs. I haven't seen that sort of confidence to go out, find the factual information, and update their knowledge bases as a result.
I mean, I think that's shortchanging them a bit. I think that's kind of how their FE works around their polar TE, is to go look shit up on the internet, even if they don't need to. For example, the freezer story where Kimberly wanted to turn down the freezer temperature because the freezer was not quite cold enough and the ice cream was melting, right? So we have a button on the front of the freezer that says temperature and a down arrow and an up arrow. But instead of just pushing the down arrow to make it colder, she looked up on the internet what temperatures the freezer of our brand of freezer is supposed to be at, was unable to find the information, and so threw up her hands in frustration and just pestered me until I turned it down in the freezer. Okay, that's an example, though, of her looking for factual information to solve this problem, but from another person, another party, the internet in this instance. It's an FE interface approach, and the lack of TE is shown in the fact that you don't need any more information than it's too warm to know to turn it down. Right? What do you think of that?
I think in that situation, there's not much confidence in finding information, knowing what's correct. If you don't find the information that you want, you find someone else to look at it. Instead, there's a short-term attempt followed by frustration. And
because FE's not
more of a weaker approach.
I mean, I agree that it's a TE issue, that in the sense that trying to solve that herself means using whatever she's going to use attentionally in fundamentally a TEFI frame, which is to say she has a clear goal of what she wants, which is the freezer to work properly, and she's going to figure out how to make it work properly by using her tool function, which is trying to interface with people. But there's no people to live interface with her about this topic. There's no like place where you can go to a video conference room and there's 8 or 12 people sitting around talking about freezer temperatures, the freezer temperature meeting group for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. At least one of the experiences of ISFJs is that they can easily get overloaded with factual data. It easily becomes too much information, and they don't know what to do with it all.
Yes!
And they can get very drained and pull out. So what I found that ISFJs find a lot easier is by learning a small amount of information at a time and doing it primarily through social interaction, talking with other people, discussing things, especially live, face-to-face. Gets all that rooted in day-to-day emotive communication, which allows them to learn, especially with friends.
Let them use their tool function
on their own, and they've just got to read a book to find all the data. And there's so many different data points coming at different places, and they can't integrate that into a more cohesive model in their head. It becomes very overloading for them.
Good observation. I mean, I think that's right on the money. I would say that it has to do with the fact that they fundamentally want to use their dominant tool function as anybody does. Their dominant says, okay, I will learn via my real experience with this thing. And then their tool function says, and my real experience of this thing will engage the dynamic system with the dynamic social system with my FE. But like you're saying, a book, that doesn't have any dynamic social system to engage with, or even the internet really doesn't. A little bit, but not so much. So it leaves them in a bit of a quandary when they don't have TE in the mix to internally and of themselves produce solution paths.
Yeah. It's definitely a hard one. I mean, there's also usually where an ISFJ tries to demonstrate more logical strength is with their TI, and where what they've managed to experience over time, what they managed to take in through social interactions, through doing things themselves, they'll then try to form into some sort of clear model, some sort of clear structure. And that clear structure can also be quite resistant to new factual information coming in, especially if it's quite a lot of it coming in.
Okay, now we're getting kind of to what I think it was you were talking the other night about in the live stream that actually prompted me to want to interview you about ISFJs. So what you're saying that because they've put a lot of energy into constructing their TI package, that they are more resistant to having that package messed with. Is that the gist of it?
Yes. Exactly. It's in a way they're sort of the opposite of the ENTP in that regard. ENTP used to thinking is both strong and very fluid. We have this idea in sociology of certain function slots being more fluid than others, and others being more stubborn. When it comes to the ISFJ and also the INFJ, they share this. They are asserting their ability to master TI, but their TE is more of a vulnerable function, almost like a blind spot. And so it's far easier for them that when they're presented with lots of factual data which contradicts the structure they've managed to build, they may even just forget that the fact was even contradicting the structure, rather than have to dismantle the structure and put it all back together again. I've seen this, should say I've seen this more often with INFJs and ISFJs, probably because I've seen more on the internet in debating and argumentation.
Well, INFJs have more of a abstract model of shit anyway, across the board.
Yeah, exactly. So
let me ask you more about that. Let me ask a follow-up question about that. So, then, you're in a duality relationship as well. You're with your dual too, right?
Yes.
Now, to what extent is she willing or able to treat TI like a fourth slot function? In other words, to seek your fulfillment of it or provision of TI structures that she adopts? Or is she unwilling to do that because it's her third slot and it's her hidden agenda and she doesn't want you to do it for her?
Well, it's more that she likes that regular support. It's more that, for instance, if she's trying to make sense of something, I can offer some information, I can offer some way of helping. What she doesn't really want, and what usually with immobilizing functions, what you don't really want is for some person just to take over the control of it, take over decisions made in it. It's not like the what you call the inferior function. It's not like that. It's not something you want outsourced almost entirely because you have no confidence whatsoever. This is something it's like your pet project. You're trying to work on. It's trying to do this for yourself. You want a more subtle, more flexible support, which is what our second function does. It's more flexible than our leading function. It's less, this is how it's going to be done. It's more, I'm going to adapt my explanations to suit what you need to know.
Okay. Would you agree that the tool function is something that people can not exactly turn off, but that their dominant function can function in conjunction with their fourth without anything else, just the 1-4?
Okay, just remember what we say call the tool function.
Would
that be from ENTP?
TI.
Okay, right. So does that switch on and off? I would say it is situational. It can be switched on and off more.
Well, what I'm basically asking is, can an ENTP, is it your position that an ENTP can go into a state where they are simply extrovertedly intuiting with introverted sensing, and not include anything else in the loop? You have to include the knowledge function in addition to the action function, but the action being NE, the knowledge being SI. So those two need to be working in coordination, never concurrently exactly, but in quick coordination with each other. Now, my question is, can you have just that and exclude TI and FE from your attentional energies?
I think I wouldn't. That was not how I'd explain it, at least from a sociologics perspective. I'd say that, at least in a sociologics perspective, we have this idea of blocking. The idea that if you have any information element, yes, it exists as an abstract concept, but when it actually appears in reality, it's going to be blocked with something. It's like a highly reactive atom, say magnesium. You know, as soon as you put in contact with air, it's going to react and turn a sort of dirty color. In the same way, if you have Ne in real life, it's going to exist either as NETI or as NEFI. It's going to be in possibilities along frameworks or possibilities along, perspectives.
Okay.
Intentions.
So let me respond to what you said so far for a second, okay, and ask you to follow up a bit. So I've experienced plenty of instances where an ENFP and I can go back and forth in some sort of storytelling, joke-making-y kind of creative event in which our processes, to me, as an ENTP, are indistinguishable. Like, we're doing the same thing. And it's not involving a lot of calculatory judgment of any sort. It's a creative endeavor. And TI and FI are both calculatory judgment functions. They give you either the weight with FI or the legitimacy with TI. They afford statuses to things, but in a deliberative fashion, not in the instantaneous way that NI and SI do. But regardless, the point I'm trying to say is, even if you don't agree with any of that sort of theory stuff I just said, my experience is ENFPs and ENTPs, when doing things that don't involve actual judgments about things, really, they're just creative, they're doing an indistinguishable process from each other.
I think I would be willing to concede the point on that one. I think certainly if you have two people, ENFP and TP, and they're just brainstorming, they come up with alternative ideas, they're considering alternative processes, in general, alternative possibilities, I'd say that's extrovert intuition, whether it's NEFI, NETI. Now, what I would add to that is that normally, I'd say that when we consider possibilities, we can consider possibilities being implied by certain frameworks, certain models, certain ways we've put together our way of understanding the world. Whereas when it comes to NEFI, it's usually possibilities about a person speculating. What may they think? What are their feelings about this? Is it that they have good intentions or bad intentions, speculating along those lines? I guess you could say it's like this. It's like leaves on the branch, right? The leaves are extrovert intuition. And for it to be really tied to something, it's going to be on some sort of structure. The branches of a tree, whether that is TI or FI.
Well, okay. Now, look, I think that the kind of creative endeavor I was talking about is one, like, say, a shared storytelling experience, where I start a story and say, once upon a time, there was 4 bunnies in the forest, and each of them lived near one of 4 large trees that formed a circle in the center of the forest. And these bunnies were named north, south, east, and west, just like the directions, and they were positioned with their respective trees, right? Now, okay, so I might start a story like that and then say, anyhow, one day, this man named Thomas, who was a compass collector and really liked to collect compasses a lot, he had in his bag a bunch of compasses, and he had heard a rumor from a local Indian chief of a natural occurring compass in the center of the woods that would tell you what direction was north, south, east, or west. If you stood in the middle of it, that these bunnies would run out from the trees and form a line from you to the direction on the compass of these 4 trees. So anyway, he was out there looking for it. And then I'd say, now you pick up the story. And then the ENFP would pick up the story, and they do the same sort of thing. Now, in this particular instance, I gave a weird, I hadn't thought of anything ahead of time, so that's what came out. But usually those stories are more, are less compass based.
Yeah, well, the thing is, you're describing there is improvised storytelling.
Right.
Now, I am not certain, personally, that improvised storytelling requires extroverted intuition, or is necessarily tied to extroverted intuition. I can see how someone who likes extroverted intuition can be very open to improvised storytelling, because there's a fact that these stories could go anywhere, and you'd be open to that uncertainty.
What do you think you're doing right now, Jack? What do you think you're doing right now? You're improvising a story.
Am I improvising the story, or I was just explaining what you described?
Right. So what you're doing every time you're explaining socionics is you're improvising a telling of a story you already know. Now, in this particular instance, it's a story that has mechanics to it, but so did my compass story, right? So it's not a story designed to entertain you by carrying you away to a magical world of bunnies in the forest. It's a story designed to help you process actual data that you're experiencing in terms of what being means, and it's designed to explain. Right?
Yeah, but I would say that that's a very crucial difference. You know, pulling something out of your imagination is very different to, referring back to what you already know and finding an articulate way of explaining that to someone else.
So how many times before... Jack, let me ask you this. Even though you've talked about this subject a million times before, how many times have you encountered these particular questions that I'm asking you? Probably not that many. And regardless, how many times have you answered these questions in anything remotely like precisely the way you just did? You might reference the same general concepts, but that's indicative of what it means to be an extroverted intuition Dom, which is to say we have that kind of relationship with our SI. We discard the most high resolution of all the memories and keep the ideational tag of them, in general. And some of our SI memories stick with us, but most of them get tagged out. That means to say get tagged out as learning. I've learned some facts and information. I have no concept or recollection of where I read this, of course, or when I read this. I just remember having read this and knowing it.
But why would you type it necessarily to SI?
NE? Because NE draws it from its... NE draws its shit that it builds off of from two sources, SE and SI. And then it validates the shit that it's building against NI. And what I mean by that is, you could do it right now. Make up something. Tell me, pretend you've been tasked with making a video about the things in the background of my screen. Go.
You say task making a video about the things in your screen.
The things that are behind me. Yeah. You go ahead and make a video right now about the things behind me.
Okay, so this is a video about the things behind Eric. We have some green squares there. Now, those are they differ in their size. And you have also a shelf with some very nice looking books. So what are those books are about? What are those books about, Eric?
These are old 1960s medical illustrated encyclopedias that I thought were interesting. I found them at a yard sale.
Oh, that sounds pretty cool. What made you want to pick up medical encyclopedias?
Okay, you're interfacing now, though. You're not extrovertedly intuiting. You're extrovertedly feeling.
Okay, but the difficulty here is that you've rigged the game. You have directed me towards physical things.
Sure, I'm demonstrating that you can. Listen, I'm not showing you that you always do, or that you generally do. I'm showing you that it's possible for you to extrovertedly intuit ideas off of extrovertedly sensed things.
Oh, yeah. No, I think it's possible.
It's also possible to generate extrovertedly intuitive ideas off of introverted sensing things. It's things you remember and already know. Well,
the idea that you say that introverted sensation is things that you remember and already know, I wouldn't necessarily, if this is where sociolinguistics makes a difference to MBTI, I wouldn't necessarily tie our memories to introverted sensation. I would say that memories can exist in an introverted sensation sort of way. For instance, the very much sensory recall, the details of our experiences.
Okay.
But I think that a memory that we have, I don't see why it's necessarily tied to introverted sensation. For instance,
okay. Well, first of all, listen. Try this as you're typing people. Okay, when you encounter people you're pretty sure are SI polar, ask them to recount specific incidences from their past. Specific examples from their past about whatever. Ask them. See what happens. They are shockingly unable to come up with anything. About anything.
It's true.
I wouldn't say that's something I've experienced.
You haven't tested it.
I mean, I remember a particular time when I asked, for instance, my mother, who I'm reasonably sure is an ENFJ, because you may disagree, you haven't met her. I remember asking her about certain experience she had when she was a child, for instance, sequences of bullying, for instance, when she was very young, and she recounted that to me. Now, assuming I understand what you're saying, that would contradict what you've proposed.
Well, I say they're shockingly unable. They're not actually completely unable. They have a couple of examples they have stored as stories about self. A couple. And if it's a big event, they'll remember, they'll know the story they tell about it. Okay? Right. There's another thing ENFJs do, which is they collect stories about themselves to use as social things. And so to the extent that it's completely in service of FE, they may have a repertoire of story. For example, my sort of nephew, Parker, he was a car salesman, and he informed me that, and he's an ENFJ, he told me about how when people came in to look at cars and they had like a dog sticker on the back of their car, he'd tell a story about how he had 4 dogs at his house, and blah, 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 and how much he liked dogs and stuff. And he did have 4 dogs at his house briefly when he was a kid, but had been years before, and he didn't mention that fact or anything, So that's an example of how SI is not completely absent in ENFJs, obviously, but it's very, they will, if they say something like if you ask an ENTJ or an ENFJ, do you have conflicts with your wife? And they'll go, yeah, sure, of course. If you ask them what they fight about, they'll go, what, blah, 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 I guess. Can you give me an example of a fight you had recently about something specific? They'll go,
I don't know, maybe.
Yes, I think I would agree with the lack of specifics in memory, and I would say that ENTPs and ENFPs can also share in the lack of specifics in memory.
But it's a style of talking about the past. It's a style of talking in general. People who have SI in the mix give examples. They'll generally start, including ENTPs and ISFJs and everything in between, with the general concept. Then they'll say, for example, I do this all the time. ISFJs are like, yeah, and then I go, for example, Kimberly will often go, blah, 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 and I'll give you a specific story of, the other day, Kimberly said, yeah, and yeah. You probably do this too, to more or less extent than me. It doesn't matter. The point is, NI front stack people don't do that. It's a discursive habit that's deep ingrained in them, and the only exceptions are the ones where it's 4 or 5, where it's hard to tell.
I think a good way to resolve this impasse is if we find a public figure who we've both typed as an ENFJ or ENTJ, and then we can see them doing this particular phenomenon.
Okay, the problem with that is I generally don't type public figures because I require, in order to type somebody, the ability to pull and push to see what their functions are actually going to do, how they're going to attend to shit. Okay. If I don't have any capacity to get my hands in there, it requires me to interface with them.
How about then we look at someone who, say a YouTuber, someone who we know we can talk to, that we have both agreed to as being a certain type. Now, interestingly, okay, I'm not 100% on this one, but I think I do agree with you now on C.S. Joseph as being a probable ENTJ.
Okay. I think Brian Chambers, I'm pretty confident in Brian Chambers being an ESTJ.
I don't think I know Brian Chamber.
He's an ESTJ who does ESTJ shit.
Okay.
Talks about his past a lot and leadership and his time in the army, and then how everyone needs to be more disciplined and whatever. ESTJ shit.
I don't know. I think ESTJ is one which is very much a big difference in MBTI and associating what's an ESTJ. Like. When I think of it,
keep in mind I don't use MBTI definitions. I don't use MBTI definitions. But go ahead.
Because like TESI, right, in MBTI, it's very sort of authoritarian, very structured, very directive. I think that's something you can agree on, unless you disagree. Whereas when it comes to sociology, it's far more about day-to-day practicality. It's about doing a good job, whatever you want to do. It's that sort of very sort of wholesome, Just go into it with your best intentions to do the best job you can, and then work on developing yourself. And there's a great degree of tinkering with TSI. It's trying things out, seeing if you can then improve very incrementally in what you're doing. It's sort of a Benjamin Franklin approach. Now, in MBTI, you wouldn't consider Benjamin Franklin to be an ESTJ, based on that stereotype which exists of more enforcer sort of personality. In a way, I'd say that TSI and MBTI is probably closer to TISE in socionics. So these examples where MBTI and socionics has less of a crossover.
Okay, well, here's how I would define TESI. I'd say being a TEDOM means having a solvency frame, first and foremost, as an implicit value. That is to say, if you cannot treat something as a goal to be attained or a problem to be solved, then it's not worthy of your attention, basically. And then the second function, SI, says they're going to exercise what they have attained from experience to realize their goal or to solve the problem as a default combo. That's their default combo. Now, whether or not that will that typically express in some sort of in some ways that rub FE wrong? Yeah, because their FE is always going to be in service of their TE because it's in the 8th slot. So my understanding of the 8th slot function is that if you're an interface type, like you're a TE DOM or an FE DOM, then you're competent at the other interface type. So an ESFJ has competent TE. In fact, quite competent TE. And similarly, go ahead.
Sorry, what do you mean by interface type?
Okay, so I call FE and TE interface functions because my understanding of them is that that we have ways of processing the static systems of the world, namely communicative logic, that is to say TI, and our own personal weight, that is to say FI. That is to say those systems are static because legitimacy in those is absolute, and you can't wish it away or will it away or whatever. There's no getting out of the fact that if I say, if I say that something illogical, that I've said something illogical. If I say something that doesn't pass a validity test, a basic validity test, like if I say all men are mortal, Bob is mortal, therefore Bob is the man, that doesn't pass a validity test, and there's no avoiding the absoluteness of that legitimacy test. Same thing with weight.
I see what you mean. Okay, so basically you mean by an interface is more about how it's done rather than essentially what it is.
Right, because it's dynamic. Because it's dynamic and responsive. When I'm dealing with a social system, because it's dynamic, I have to be responsive to the other agents in the system. When I'm dealing with a physical system, with TE, I have to be responsive to the actualities in the physical system. So I may go into a situation thinking, this is how one fixes a doorknob. But that's not TE. That's SITI. TE actually looks at this particular doorknob, how it's broken, how this particular doorknob works, and addresses it accordingly.
Yeah, I think that makes quite a bit of sense. Because at the end of the day, when it's TE, it's situational. It's how to fix this particular thing, rather than these are the rules for how any doorknob in any situation will be fixed.
And you can also think about it in these terms. What comprises good FI and what comprises good TI is unequivocal and not situational. In other words, if I'm just racked with despair and self-loathing, that's not sometimes I guess it could be the quote unquote the right state of being if you just murdered a bunch of people or something. But by and large, negative feelings are negative and positive feelings are positive. And So go ahead.
I would say one thing though, that I'm not sure that FI lacks situationality, because I think with FI it's very much tailored to the particular person you're interacting with. I think it's that more that embrace of a situationality, which is something which TEFI types can be more open to.
Okay, well, I guess it's a matter of what do we mean by situational. It's like, it's situational in the sense that in any given situation, TI will produce a conclusion that's either valid or invalid, legitimate or illegitimate. Same with FI.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's binary in its designations.
Yeah.
Okay, whereas FTE is responsive to your goal. So it could be good TE sometimes to make a bridge that falls apart when a car drives over it. If you're making a movie in which a car needs to fall through a bridge, then that's good TE. But normally it would be bad TE. They're not really equivalents like that for TI and FI, because the conclusion, like, you don't go, well, sometimes it would be good for me to be sad when I see you because I hate you so much, but this time it's bad for me to be sad. It sort of doesn't make sense, Anyway, it's non-voluntary. You feel what you feel. You don't have a choice about it.
Yeah. And the thing is, even often a good way of telling if someone's being particularly TE-ish, if they keep on answering questions by "it depends," and they're trying to go for a pretty much straightforward yes or no question, because that's a clear sign that they're saying, well, it depends on these factors and these particular situations, and lots of facts and examples where some situations it would work out so perfectly that way.
Okay, all right. Listen, I'm going to ask you some typing questions. You pretend to be an INFP, okay? Make sure, of course, that I am able to get no actual concrete answers out of you about anything.
You're asking me to be my supervisor.
Okay, so are you more likely to value somebody's social grace in a group situation or their ability to take charge?
Well, I know the things for me. I always find that it's, I always get really upset that I'm not really able to take charge in lots of situations. At the same time, I sort of really like it when someone can also be very socially graceful.
Okay, let me ask you another question, an easier one. Let me ask you an easier question. Do you prefer to use a spoon or a fork with soup?
Oh, well, with soup, I think I found that spoons work a lot better than forks. I don't know why would you want to use a fork? I've never had much luck with forks.
Tell me about that. If you had a bad experience with forks, have you experienced any fork-related traumas? Have you experienced any fork-related traumas?
Oh goodness, traumas. I'm trying to be a legitimate INFP here.
So you think INFP would answer the soup question? You're saying the INFP would answer the soup question?
How do I answer that?
I was setting that up for a humorous opportunity for you to be like, well, it really depends. I mean, if it's a thick soup.
Oh goodness. I mean, there's one time when I tried to use a fork on some soup, but it wouldn't stay on the fork.
That's soup's problem, Jack, not the forks. Okay.
Okay.
You gotta go.
Because there are people in the house who are trying to sleep.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's wrap this up anyway. I want to upload this and get it cracking. It was a pleasure talking to you. Just one last question before you go. What will it mean to you when the World Socionic Society has attained its ultimate glory and place in history? What will that look like?
I think it's where, well, a more concrete goal, I think, is replacing Myers-Briggs type indicator with socionics in the practice of Jungian typology in various workplaces, businesses, schools, dating sites, all that sort of thing. I feel that if we knock MBTI off its pedestal and have socionics there, I think that would be a good example of one of our main goals being achieved. But in general, I think it's taking this tool which has all this potential. It's all this, so much of it can be done and achieved by actually considering what type means, considering how different types interact and how people have certain strengths, certain weaknesses, various values, and reconciling that and finding a way for people to bridge their differences and finding ways to actually create optimized teams and businesses, unlocking all that potential. So I've got two answers. The concrete goal, knocking MBTI off the top position as the most practiced typology in the Western world. And the more open goal is just having all that potential realized. I don't think that's ever going to really be achieved because it's so open-ended. There's so much potential to be realized from that.
Okay, Jack, are you saying you want one world government who forces everyone to adopt socionics as their religion?
No, but that would be a pretty good novel.
That would be.
I think isn't what's it called? What isn't it? Divergent? I see Divergent as like a sort of simplification of these typologies, and then
I haven't seen
sort
it.
of that absurdum of how destructive it could be. It's basically a whole civilization where people are given a personality test and assigned their role in society based on four. I think there are four. I mean, this Divergent was one person who didn't fit in any of the boxes.
Uh-oh, that's trouble. Yeah. I think we know what happens to him. Electric chair.
Oh, yeah.
Electric chair.
Okay. Oh, no, actually, I guess they would have been prescribed electric chair, but instead they joined the Rebel Alliance.
Oh, there's a Rebel Alliance. Okay.
Of course, there's a Rebel Alliance. It's one of those trilogy young adult.
Listen, you guys, we're not types. We are people.
Yeah.
It sounds pretty intense.
It does, and people can very much agree with that. I probably would agree with that as well. We are not types, but a certain small subsection of our human processing is to do with taking information and metabolizing it in different forms and ways, and that is typable. It's not a type of person. It's, as we call it in sociologics, a type of information metabolism.
Right. And I would just add to that people are most free to be their complete selves when they're aware of how their habits dictate their choices in the status quo with attention.
I think I would agree to that.
Okay, well, great. Very nice talking to you. Thanks so much for letting me interview you, and good luck with your World Socionics study and your typing business. Everybody, you got to get a little taste of Jack's typing style, and if you're interested, you can go visit his channel. I'm sure there's instructions there on how to get him to type you. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Bye.